Greetings. You know, if there's one positive that could be drawn out of the cringe-inducing and incendiary Senate confirmation hearings for Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination, it might be this: that the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, is being exposed as the left-wing partisan organization it has been for years. And what is one indication of this? The fact that former ACLU board member Alan Dershowitz recently released an editorial saying pretty much this. And to Mr. Dershowitz, all I have to say is thank you, sir, and thank you for climbing aboard the ship upon which we've been sailing for a long, long time.
In America, we don't allow people to destroy other people's reputations and careers based on an inference of guilt the way the ACLU now says. The ACLU says we should presume guilt.
Yes, interesting developments from Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz, who on October 8th released a very insightful editorial for the Washington Examiner, which will likely increase the invective directed at him by leftists who already don't like him appearing on Fox News or actually pointing out the fact that the so-called Russian collusion probe is pretty much baseless. This time, Mr. Dershowitz saliently observed the sad, troubling way in which the ACLU appeared to pander to leftist donors rather than focus on civil liberties during the Kavanaugh hearings and throughout much of the Trump administration. Comparing his time as a board member to the ACLU of today, Mr. Dershowitz wrote this, quote, "The ACLU used to be cash poor but principle rich. Now, ironically, after Trump taking office, the ACLU has never been so cash rich yet principle poor." End quote. He also notes not only how much richer the ACLU is, but the fact that the ACLU is now producing commercials that are almost indistinguishable from the DNC and MoveOn.org. And in fact, they seem to only be defending civil liberties when those civil liberty defenses don't help members of the GOP. Quote, "The old ACLU would never have been silent when Michael Cohen's office was raided by the FBI and his client's files seized, and it surely would have argued against a presumption of guilt regarding sexual allegations directed against a judicial nominee." End quote. Well said, Mr. Dershowitz. Clearly, the Kavanaugh hearings were not a trial per se, but they allowed uncorroborated allegations to be heard in a public forum and put this man on trial in the court of public opinion. And they also did something else. They distracted people from real information that they could have studied about Mr. Kavanaugh's background on things like the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, whether Mr. Kavanaugh's support for the Patriot Act conforms to the Constitution, whether or not Mr. Kavanaugh believes in an expansive view of the executive branch's powers. All those questions seem to have been blithely overlooked by the ACLU while it walked in lockstep to a left-wing agenda that focused on uncorroborated and prurient allegations, evidently in an ends justifies the means modality to try to knock him out. So Mr. Dershowitz, hats off to you for doing this, and we know that you will receive a lot of criticism. But some minor criticism on this side, Mr. Dershowitz, because some of us have been very well aware of the fact that the ACLU has been left-wing and has not covered the wide spectrum of rights for a long, long time. Some of us are aware that the ACLU stood on the side of the state going after a bakery owner in Colorado and his private property and his freedom of association in deciding not to bake a cake for a gay couple. Some of us are aware of other organizations like the Institute for Justice and the American Center for Law and Justice having to spring up to fill the gap that has been left by the left-wing oriented ACLU. So, Mr. Dershowitz, again, compliments and thank you for observing something that is extremely important. But there is a bit of frustration as we look at this because some of us have known for a long time that we could not trust the ACLU to really support liberty. That being said, we welcome your opinions, everyone, even Mr. Dershowitz, if you are watching. We would enjoy to hear from you. And don't forget, folks, to like and subscribe. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that little bell because it will indicate to you when new videos are popping up from MRC-TV. For MRC-TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.